In this video, we'll compare the Sony a5100 to the Sony ZV-E10 to see which you should buy or whether you should upgrade. So the Sony a5100 and ZV-E10 are both cameras that I own. The a5100 I've had around since about 2016, so around 5 years now, where of course the Sony ZV-E10 has only been out since August of this year, 2021, and I've had it since then. So the amount of time I've had hands-on with both of these cameras is considerably different, but I think we're at a place now where we can do a proper comparison to see whether the newer camera is worth it compared to the old trusty a5100. So I picked these two cameras to compare because they're similar in a lot of ways, and I think for some of you it will be a reasonable upgrade path. They're both Sony APS-C size cameras that have no EVF, which is an electronic viewfinder. This sets both of these cameras apart from pretty much the rest of the Sony APS-C size camera range, which is most of the Sony Alpha cameras, which nearly all have electronic viewfinders. And I find that both of these cameras are best suited for video. Now they're both fine stills cameras as well, but I think most people who pick up these cameras are looking to use them for things like YouTube videos like I'm using here, or for vlogs and things like that. They're both smallish in size, they're not exactly the same size, but I think generally they do make a pretty good side-by-side comparison of an older model versus a newer model, even if the naming convention has changed a lot. So let's have a quick look at the similarities between these two cameras. They both have a 24.2 megapixel APS-C size sensor. In fact, we're pretty sure that it is the same sensor. Now this is a huge upside for the a5100 and a downside for the ZV-E10, because if they're using the same sensor, even though these cameras were released 7 years apart, you think, well, why am I buying a new camera with an old sensor? Well, it is a good question, and it probably just says how good a sensor there is in the a5100. So from that regard, the quality of the picture that you should get from the a5100 should be fairly comparable to what you would get with the ZV-E10. They both use the Sony E-mount lens system, which is great. It means you can use all the same lenses. Perfect if you are upgrading from, say, the a5100 to the ZV-E10, or if you just want to know that in the future all your lenses are compatible. Then both sharing the E-mount lens system means that you can use exactly the same lenses on both, which is a big plus. As mentioned before, neither of them have an EVF electronic viewfinder, which of course in bright situations is particularly frustrating because you just basically can't see what is on the screen with a bright light shining on it, and without an electronic viewfinder you can't really compose your shots very well. The reason they remove this is that both of these cameras are aimed at more videography and vlogging angles where an EVF isn't as required. And of course it keeps the weight and the size of both of these cameras down. And both of these cameras have a 3-inch touchscreen, which you can use for things like touch to focus and a few other features. Now you can't actually use the touchscreen to navigate through the menus, though I don't find this too much of a problem, though I don't really know why they've done it either, but it is really useful for things like touch to focus, so that is a good plus point for both of these cameras. And both of the screens on these cameras flip forward so that you can monitor yourself from this kind of angle without having to get a monitor or another way of monitoring your shots, which is another plus point, especially if you are on a budget. So they are the main similarities between these cameras, but as you can imagine, as there are 7 years between these two cameras, there are a lot of differences, and we'll run through those now. So in terms of stabilisation, the ZV-E10 has gyroscopic stabilisation, whereas the a5100 has no built-in stabilisation at all. Gyroscopic stabilisation is digital stabilisation, and it allows you to fix shaky footage in editing by using the metadata to fix the shakiness in your shot. So the shot will still look shaky when you first load it up, but you can use the metadata to stabilise your shots. Now the way this works, it kind of uses the edge of your shot to kind of punch into your shot, so you kind of lose the edge so that you can stabilise your shot in the centre. So if you are going to use this for if you're out walking and vlogging, for example, you want to be using as wide an angle lens as possible for the best results. But the ZV-E10 having this stabilisation is a huge advantage over the Sony a5100. The ZV-E10 has a hot shoe which you can use to attach a separate microphone or a flash or something like that, or use to mount a monitor or something like that, whereas the a5100 doesn't have a hot shoe at all. It does have a built-in pop-up flash, but if you know you're going to need separate accessories like a microphone that you would like to attach to your camera, then this is a big plus of the ZV-E10 over the a5100. The ZV-E10 has a maximum ISO of 32,000, whereas the a5100 has 25,600, which basically means that the ZV-E10 will have better low light performance. 425 focus points on the ZV-E10 compared to 179 on the A5100, so it just means it gets that faster, sharper autofocus and can focus on more parts of your shot. Continuous shooting, which is burst shooting, the ZV-E10 can do up to 11 frames per second, whereas the A5100 can just do 6 frames per second. Both reasonable, but if you know you're going to be doing burst shooting, things like wildlife photography and sports photography, this is where you want more frames per second, so worth bearing in mind if you think you're going to use these cameras for either of those functions. There's no microphone port on the A5100, whereas there is one on the newer ZV-E10, and that is the same for headphone jack, which is really great for playback and monitoring your shots afterwards to make sure that your audio is fine. That is on the ZV-E10 and there isn't one on the A5100. So understandably, the newer camera has newer features. And that's the same when it comes to video recording. The ZV-E10, one of the big selling points and one of the main reasons I got it, was that 4K video recording, and you can record up to 30 frames per second in 4K. It also boasts 120 frames per second at 1080p, which is great for doing slow-mo footage, kind of B-roll kind of footage, where you want things to kind of look smooth and slowed down. The A5100 in comparison only supports 1080p at up to 60 frames per second. To feel like this footage still looks really good, and I'll do a little side-by-side just now. And now I'm recording with the Sony A5100. So generally the shot doesn't look too different and still looks pretty crisp, though I've had to increase the size of my shot in editing to fit a 4K window. So if I drop it down now to what its natural size would be in a 4K window, this is the resolution that it is actually recording at. It's half the size of 4K. So if you want that increased resolution, you get better picture detail. Even if you're only going to be exporting the video at 1080p, you get better color depth from recording in 4K. So something worth bearing in mind, but as you can see, the A5100 still looks pretty good. The ZV-E10 has Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, whereas the A5100 just has Wi-Fi. Great for transferring your shots and stuff, but Bluetooth can be useful for extra accessories and things like that. So worth bearing in mind if you've got your eyes on picking up a Bluetooth accessory, this wouldn't work with the A5100. Also, the ZV-E10 has tracking eye autofocus and animal eye autofocus, which is great for tracking the focus of your subject's eye, especially if it's moving. The A5100 still has good autofocus, but it isn't quite as sharp as the newer camera. A nice feature of the ZV-E10 is that it has a time-lapse feature built in. Now, the A5100, it is available, but it's through this old app store where you've got to buy the app. I think it costs £7.99, $9.99, something like that. And it's a nightmare to navigate. I don't know why they've made it like that, but they have. So it is available, and I have made a video on how to access the apps on older cameras, such as the A5100, which I'll link here. But yeah, it's a pain. With the ZV-E10, it's just built in. It's what you would expect, so that is a nice feature of this camera as well. And full individual reviews of both of these cameras are available on the channel, and I'll put links to them in the description. And if you're enjoying the video, please consider dropping a like on the video and subscribing to the channel. So let's look now at the physical dimensions and comparisons between the ZV-E10 and the A5100. Of course, the ZV-E10 is bigger, at 115 by 64 by 45 millimeters, whereas the A5100 is 110 by 63 by 36 millimeters. The A5100 weighs 283 grams, whereas the ZV-E10 weighs 343 grams. So a bit heavier and a bit bigger, but neither of them are anything close to what you would call a large camera. Both perfectly fine for vlogging and travel camera, which you would put in your pocket. But if you're really space conscious, yes, the A5100 is smaller and lighter. Let's have a close look now at both of these cameras side by side. So here they are, the A5100 by the ZV-E10. You can see the size of the A5100 is slightly smaller. And the flip-up screen on the A5100 is a 180-degree flip-up screen, and so you can see it from above the camera. With the ZV-E10, it flips out to the side and also flips 180 degrees in this angle. It means that you can't flip it up above, but to the side I generally find is just as useful. They both have the same control wheel in the middle and a menu button. However, the ZV-E10 has a function button which gives you more options for customizing buttons, and they both have a playback and a bin button. The A5100 has the pop-up flash, whereas the ZV-E10 has the hot shoe. The A5100 has these strap holders which make a lot of noise if you're not using a strap. The ZV-E10 just has a solid strap holder, so useful to know because they can rattle around those A5100 strap holders, especially when you are vlogging. Can be quite loud if you're using the onboard microphones. So here we can see the top of the cameras. They've both got a kit lens on here, and you can see that they're about the same length. The record mode button is very big on the ZV-E10, which is a nice feature, whereas it's really small and fiddly to get to on the A5100. So the shutter button is slightly smaller on the ZV-E10, whereas it's nice and big on the A5100, but that's made space for the video button to be bigger. The ZV-E10 has a couple of extra buttons. It has this control dial, which does stuff like control your aperture, and it also has the shallow depth of field button and the slow and quick and video select button. They both have a rocker for zooming in and out, wide and telephoto, which is really useful to have that control on the camera and not just on the lens. Looking at the side ports of these cameras, they've both got mini HDMI, but it's USB Type-C on the ZV-E10, whereas it's the older USB type on the A5100. Also, the memory card slot is on the side of the A5100. We'll see in a moment that the battery compartment on the ZV-E10 holds the memory card. They both use the same battery, which is slightly disappointing in the ZV-E10 because it is quite a low capacity battery, but I've not found too many issues with that running out. They should both be able to take around 400 shots on a single charge. They both have a tripod thread on the bottom, and on both of these it is quite useful that it doesn't interfere with opening the battery door when you have got a tripod connected. With other cameras such as the A6000, it actually gets in the way and you can't open the battery door while it's on a tripod. They've both got the kit lens, which comes bundled in with these cameras as standard attached now, but of course they both have the E-mount lens system, and there are plenty of good E-mount lenses available. So as you can see, cameras generally look fairly similar. The ZV-E10 with newer features, the A5100 is a bit smaller. Now both of these cameras do have their own issues. The ZV-E10 has been massively highlighted that it has a rolling shutter issue, which is when you move the camera around, it kind of has a jellying, kind of warps the image a lot, which is terrible for if you're a vlogger. Now, seeing as this is advertised as a vlogging camera, I can't really understand how they've managed to make such a big error with this. The A5100 doesn't do this anywhere near as much. Maybe it's an issue with 4K. Some people have said that they have found that it's less of an issue recording in 1080p. To be honest, for me, it's been an issue for both, so worth bearing in mind. With the A5100, of course, one of the big problems with it is how quickly it overheats. Very, very frustrating. Now for me, I found the A5100 overheats from continuous recording after around 20 to 25 minutes, which isn't great. But I've had a lot of comments on my channel of people reporting that the A5100 is overheating as soon as 5 to 10 minutes of recording, which basically means I wouldn't be able to record a video like this in one take. Really a big problem for the A5100. Now, I've been using the ZV-E10 for a little while. I have not hit any of those issues with overheating, even recording in 10K. Even recording in 4K, I think it'd be a little bit more expensive for a 10K camera. Anyway, which is great because I thought it might still be an issue on one of these more compact body sizes, but they seem to have sorted that issue out. So other than the size, the other reason why you would buy the A5100 over the ZV-E10, of course, is the price. Now recently, the A5100 has actually been surging in price quite a lot, so you can't get it right now as cheaply as you used to be able to. You used to be able to get it for about $250 second hand. Right now, you're looking at more like $300 to $350 second hand, which is still a decent price for this camera. It's getting harder and harder to buy this camera new. I don't think it's being made anymore, so anywhere that stocks it having it new, it's getting harder and harder to find. Right now on Amazon, they're not selling this camera brand new, so you've got the risk of buying a second-hand camera which might have a few issues with it. Whereas the ZV-E10 as a brand new camera is still at its top price, which is $800 brand new. So there's a huge price discrepancy between these cameras. The ZV-E10 is probably likely to come down in price and will probably settle at around $600 to $650 new in probably around 6 months to a year would be my prediction. Basically, what we're looking at is that the A5100 is cheaper and older with less features. If you're looking for something that is a bit newer, the ZV-E10 has newer features, but of course is more expensive. And I think overall that price will probably dictate your decision. The ZV-E10 has 4K, has the headphone jack, has Bluetooth, has microphone jack, and has that gyroscopic stabilization. The A5100, you're having to go without all these features, but you get a smaller camera at a lower price point. Though I'd like to say, in my personal opinion, I have loved having the A5100 and I'm still planning on using it for a lot of my videos. I'm recording this now on the ZV-E10 because of that 4K resolution, but the A5100 is a great camera. So if you're still happy with the results that you get from your A5100, I would definitely stick with it until you start needing 4K, 120 frames per second, or you're finding a frustration with a lack of features such as the microphone jack input. Either way, they're both great cameras for making videos. I'll leave links in the description to both of these cameras if you'd like to buy either of them, but if you've enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing to the channel and dropping a like on the video. But until next time, see ya.